Being an artist is hard, with various industries having massive layoffs and AI becoming more and more prevalent without any sort of common sense. It's hard not to be discouraged. A not so great part of American culture is the devaluation of the arts, which is ironic when you look on our culture's reliance on art. But hey, they never said this place would have to make sense. I remember being encouraged and discouraged from making art while growing up, but mostly discouraged. In high school, my art teacher had the capacity to char grill raw 9th grade me for liking anime and wanting to draw big goth titties. Like, sorry Mrs. H, but titty drawer is one of the few art careers that will net you more cash than a high school art teacher, like easily. It's somewhere just under furry artist if my research is correct. Military recruiters, which were huge in my school, would lambaste my decision to go to art school instead of selling my body to the United States government because an art degree was worthless. It didn't help that I was unfortunate enough to be a target of the Art Institute, which did in fact end up being worthless, but that's a story for another day. And even as an adult, when I decided to leave my small hometown in pursuit of an art career, my coworker on the garbage route I ran asked me, "Why would you do that? Don't you know you could fail?" It didn't help that art school was actually pretty detrimental to me. As an industry, it's dedicated to making you a commercial artist. Its goal is to get you a job, which is great for most people, I'm sure, but it crushed my creativity. The quote that gets thrown around a lot is that everyone is born an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. And that's hard because, like I said, at least in America, our culture values things other than creative work. I mean, it values almost everything other than creative work. The creative spirit is often pushed into a corner and left alone. I mean, we see how the world is treating artists. It's easy to let that get to you. I believe that the older you get, or the more set in your ways you get, the more permission you need to be creative. Why was it that in junior high, my friends and I devised an entire alt-universe, Kingdom Hearts level fantasy world almost on accident, but as soon as I get a factory job at 21 and get consistently shown I'm worth less than a box of Frosted Flakes, I can't seem to write a dang thing. Oddly enough, it was Dungeons & Dragons that helped me with my creative rut. Not because D&D is like more fun than other forms of art or anything like that, but because it was through D&D that I was shown how to be creative again. You see, I spent a lot of time in high school playing D&D, and I just sort of naturally absorbed like the lore that was in the books. So in my 20s, my games were as canon D&D as you could possibly get. But it was in college that I ran into a blog filled with years of words written by someone who never forgot how to be creative. And it was for Dungeons & Dragons of all things. The blog opened my mind to the reality that you can do anything in fantasy and anything in D&D. The books are just books. And instead of explaining to you how that happened, I want to try to show you. So sit back and strap in because we're about to dive into the deliciously weird blog known as Goblin Punch. An interview with Arnold Kemp, author of the Goblin Punch blog. The interviewer asks, "What's your gaming origin story?" Arnold replies, "I pissed on an electric fence while playing Pokemon Blue and there was also an eagle." Goblin Punch was started in November 2012 by Arnold Kemp. He wrote about a tumble tree, which is a tree with semi-living melons that roll from the branches to find someone to eat them, and then compel them to plant the melon seeds somewhere else. It also throws melons at you if you piss it off. The blog has been active ever since that post, waning in and out of consistency based on who knows what. Arnold isn't a person that is in the public eye, even in terms of like the blogosphere. If you scour the blog itself, you might find a few personal pieces of information, but Goblin Punch is about ideas, first and foremost. It came around in the heyday of the OSR, or the Old School Renaissance, which was a movement inside of indie tabletop role-playing games that sought to move away from what games like Pathfinder, Dungeons & Dragons, and Apocalypse World was creating. It was about reclaiming this perceived old-school way of playing, which maybe didn't exist to begin with, which included dungeon crawling, not meticulously planning sessions, reacting to random tables and the players, and ultimately a focus on player skill over character skill. What that means is that when faced with a trap in a dungeon, for instance, It's not about rolling a d20 to disarm it. It's about figuring out how to disarm it with creative thinking. The OSR as an indie scene was focused on creating things, whether that was in the blogosphere where you would create articles with gameable materials, or if that was in the physical realm, where people put a lot of effort into making print books, which over time became more and more professional and helped build this culture of enjoying the construction of a book. It would be wrong of me to continue without saying that the sort of popular sphere of the OSR was mostly comprised of white men. Not that there weren't women or non-binary folks, black people, or people of color, but like most things in gaming, it had its troubles with misogyny, sexism, and racism. This video will not be a history of the OSR, so I will not be going into the specifics at this time. My hope here is to talk about a collection of writing that inspired me years ago, see what's there to salvage, and ultimately pass judgment on the use of the blog now. I am the arbiter of what is useful, after all, so let's jump into it. A man is walking along a deserted street. Suddenly he realizes that the silence is more profound, as if a loud noise had just ceased. There is a rattle as a sewer grate slides over rough stone. In the darkness, a fleshy face, leering with undisguised hunger. It lunges forward on a thick neck that slides out of the darkness like a sheath. 1 foot, 3 feet, 6 feet long. And then it bites him on the arm and drags him down the narrow gap, yanking and twisting to fit the man's body through that too small space. And when the sounds of eating have ceased, the song resumes. The false hydra is an encounter, a monster, that nestles itself in a town and hides itself in plain sight with the power of its magical song. It's inaudible only because of ignorance. Arnold cites the psychological phenomenon inattentional blindness, which occurs when someone fails to notice something in plain sight simply from, well, inattention. This is a natural thing. There are many tasks that we perform daily that put us in a sort of autopilot. The most common and maybe dramatic version of this is when you get in the car to go to the grocery store, and in your head, you just suddenly are there. You didn't blink out of existence. The task was just so repetitive that your thoughts wandered, and it made you feel like the trip was a lot shorter than it really was. The false hydra's song allows it to live in these gaps of inattention, becoming invisible. But as Arnold puts it, it's far more reliable and much more subtle. And after growing up from the ground and singing its song, it begins to feed. The hydra is a growing lad and needs some of that good old human source protein in order to grow thicker, longer, and multitudinous heads. This is where the true power of the hydra is revealed. If we go back to the man who was yanked from the street and pulled into the sewer, what happened with his wife, his family, his friends? If they were to notice his absence, they would surely go looking for him. Their search would inevitably lead them into the sewers or the underground, and the hydra would not be able to avoid detection. But the hydra's song does more than allow it to live in the gaps of inattention. It plays with your mind, soothes it, softens the wrinkles of the brain. I quote, "They will not notice his absence nor remember him." This accompanies images of these horrid creatures from Zelda, which Arnold uses to paint the visage of the hydra. A pale face with wet black holes for eyes, a neck stretching several feet long out from gaps in the ground, glaring through windows with its face pressed to the glass, fogging it. The false hydra is a truly terrible being that would fit perfectly inside a John Carpenter film, and could go down in history alongside the likes of The Thing or Freddy Krueger. Arnold does a marvelous thing with his writing by never slipping out of the world itself. Information on the hydra has a source, whether it be scholars studying the beast, spellcasters, or patterns found in criminal trials. Let me show you an example. A weak sentence might say, "People say there is no such thing as a false hydra." But Arnold opts for this instead. "In gentler lands you will find skeptics. These erudite scholars will stroke their chin and calmly tell you that there is no such thing as a false hydra." He stays rooted in the world. It's easy to look at the false hydra and see a creature that is dominating and unbeatable by the natural means that you're given with a character sheet in your sort of typical dungeon crawler game. Arnold specifically mentions that spells that reveal invisible creatures won't have an effect. But he doesn't just leave you hanging in the ether for possible solutions. and he doesn't coddle you with one correct solution. Arnold's writing has a way of instilling you with confidence, partially with how candid it is. He dips in and out of something that's sort of like a journalistic style, and goes into this more chatty voice often, and without it feeling jarring. And in doing this, he lists several ideas for the location and destruction of a false hydra, including what happens if your players just shrug and say, "Let's get out of here." I won't spoil it all by reading them to you. I think part of the joy in this is how it sparks your own creativity by leaving things open to interpretation. The blog post ends with a series of images and captions. Here's a few of my favorite. False hydras are freakish. Their fragmented minds are mirrored in the people they devour. Dragon hydras are cool, actually. I should do a post about them at some point. I'm actually quite pleasant and good-natured in person. I don't know why I keep writing such horrible things. A quick tangent. Arnold wrote this great list of 100 magical items, and I'm just going to read off a few of them that I really like and have stolen to use in my games. The Ring of Adventurous Limb. If worn on a hand, the entire arm will vanish. It will return after 24 hours have elapsed. Roll a d10, and this determines what happened in those 24 hours after your arm disappeared. The options are a tattoo on your arm. The arm is injured. It has gained a ring, probably a wedding ring. There is a ring missing, or nothing special. And then it states at the end, it will have a similar effect on legs. The Book of Epic Boredom. When reading, save versus sleep. I love that one. The Belt of Cat Imprisonment. When laid on the ground, felines are compelled to sit in the center of it, as charm, like the spell. Demonic Muffin. When eaten, reverses your gravity for 1d6 minutes. A Hungry Coin. It is cursed. Will attempt to eat other coins that it comes into contact with. Eats 100 coins an hour. That one's just mean. And lastly, Animate Rope with the personality of a loyal dog. 50 feet. Must be taught knots the way a dog must be taught tricks. I've given that one to my players a few times, and I always love what they do with it. Anyways, tangent over. Back to the video. Frequently, the picture you see of a druid is some green-haired boy scout cavorting atop a white wolf, or gazing soulfully into the eyes of a moose. They're depicted as serene bringers of balance and peace, who live in harmony with all life. Nope. No. 9. Druids are creatures possessed by the cold spirit of nature. I believe it was this article that I read first, and it gave me an entirely new lens with which to view fantasy. In his article, 7 Myths Everyone Believes About Druids, Arnold confronts the 5th edition trope-ridden landscape of druids with the cold, selfish brutality of nature. Arnold paints the druid as a personification of nature, with a capital N, a sentience with a desire to be natural, to grow fat like a bear, to watch a dry summer storm burn the trees, to feed on the energy of a wolf's hunger, and a cruel hatred of the unnatural, mathematics, philosophy, rationality. Arnold says, nature is red in tooth and claw. Nature is hungry and rapacious. Nature is self-absorbed. Does a panther care about anything beyond its own well-being? And because these things are nature, they are also druids. What isn't explicitly stated in this blog, but which fascinates me to no end, is that, yes, nature can be described as those things. But nature does not think of itself. The tree does not contemplate the fall, or the fire. Arnold is creating a personification of nature that must reckon with itself, that must think of itself and understand itself. Druids believe that which is natural is good and what is unnatural is bad. This is ethics. The druids aren't simply acting as extensions of nature, they are believers in it. Arnold says the philosophy of the druid is no philosophy, but in acting on what they consider an ethical good, wouldn't that be considered a philosophy? And in that way, are they attempting to emulate nature by simply not thinking about it? This is a reckoning, nature confronted with the curse of sentience. Arnold even says that they use language to communicate, but do so with a sense of self-loathing. The druids are not inherently good or bad, they are human. Their beliefs may be faulty or founded on strange logic, and that alone creates something compelling. To druids, their enemy is the city, the idea of the city, which is born only in the minds of men and is not given to them by nature. Arnold paints a picture by talking about a trapper out in the woods, confronted with the snarling, fanged face of a druid. Sometimes, the trapper dies thinking that the druid hates him, but that's not true. The druid looks right through him and sees the city. When the druid bites out the trapper's jugular vein, the druid can taste the dirty rainwater dripping off the gargoyles. When the druid pulls out the trapper's heart and eats it, he can feel concrete foundations crumbling between his molars. He didn't kill a man, he killed a piece of the city. What Arnold is doing is painting the picture of a culture. It's magical, sure, but grounded in something human. Right and wrong. Belief in something greater. The druids believe in the forest. The eternal forest that will grow after they are gone and has grown since before they were born. A culture based in faith. They must operate on faith that what they believe is good is in fact good. That what they do is natural. And that it's not in opposition to what is actually natural. It's an article that's perfect for someone who wants to play as a druid in a D&D campaign because you will have opinions on these things. And that's how we operate as people in this world. We are embedded inside of our own cultures, which have their own morality, ethics, philosophies, beliefs, and it's in our acceptance of and refutation of those things that shape us. We do not hold the beliefs we do simply by existing. They are things we are taught through growing up how we did, through education, both imposed on us and sought out by us. After all, who is to say that civilization is in fact unnatural? Who is to say the domestication of the dog is unnatural? Who is to say that farmland and cooperation are unnatural? The druids have their answers, but what are yours? The delicious blog post. A reading. Two farmers are talking across a fence. They are leaning on their hoes. I'm delicious. What? I don't really think I'm delicious, it's just a fun thing to say. That you're delicious? Where did you hear that from? I don't rightly recall. I think I heard it in town. Someone said they were delicious. I'm delicious? I'm delicious. I'm delicious. Well, that's enough gabbing. I've got to get back to my cabbages. 10 days later, everyone is saying it. 11 days later, a space dragon lands in the town and eats everyone's brains. Their brains are delicious.
Hello. This is a little tangent number 2, I guess, for this video. But this section of the video, I had written a good chunk. It was like 10 extra minutes on the Catherine spell on the Goblin Punch blog. But after like recording that and like thinking about it and like reading more about it, I've been sort of inspired to make that like its own separate video because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to that spell. So I think for now I'm going to leave that out of this video and put this little tangent into as like a little teaser for that section. But yeah, that's one of the more popular posts on the blog, and I think it warrants enough for its own video that I will, start writing after this one is done. So yeah, tangent over back to the video, I guess.
The beauty of diving into such a specific blog is that not only is there a plethora of interesting gameable content, but that this is not the only blog like this. The OSR was built around blogs, many of which still exist to this day, and many of which have hundreds of posts with ideas for you to use in your games. Goblin Punch itself is still going, with more recent posts being about the do's and don'ts of adapting FromSoft game design into your tabletop games. I chose the blog posts I did because they are the posts that got me into Goblin Punch. If you look at the list of most popular posts on Goblin Punch, most of them are here, and they're still here after all these years. I think the best way to conclude this video is to circle back on the idea of creativity, because there's a blog post about that. Arnold wrote, "How to be creative, also Blobbins," on July 14th, 2014. In it, he details 9 steps or tips to being creative. Let's go through them and solve this creativity thing once and for all. Number 1. Keep a slush pile. Arnold describes this as just a list of ideas, incomplete or otherwise. Things that haven't found a home. I keep mine on Google Docs and in some random notepad documents. He suggests Frankensteining 2 sort of good ideas together into a brilliant mongrel. And I've gotta say, as a creative, this is my go-to tool for figuring out a story or an idea. I can't count the amount of times I've been stuck on 2 different ideas, only to realize that they go together and are, in fact, one idea. Number 2. Use your ideas. This is great for tabletop games and is honestly the easiest way to break through any sort of creative block you're facing when writing adventures, games, or anything related. Arnold suggests you just go for it. Use your little half-formed ideas at the table for your players because he guarantees you'll have more ideas while role-playing them. Number 3. Don't let creativity be something you only do when being creative. What Arnold means is that you should be revisiting ideas all of the time, because when you do, you're being bombarded by new images and places which might inspire the rest of the idea to come forward. Number 4. Steal shamelessly. This gets thrown around by a lot of creatives, including me, but Arnold goes a step further and asks you to pay attention to why you like the thing in the first place. If you examine a thing you like to find awesome parts you like, you can steal just that thing and add it to your slush pile. Number 5. Stealing names can be fun. Figure out what part of the name you like the most. This is similar to the last one. Number 6. Turn normal animals into unlikely chimeras. This one is similar to the name one, but specifically about animals. Number 7. Inversions are fun. Speaking of tropes here, Arnold says, write an adventure about saving a dragon from a princess. Or just ask yourself open-ended questions. What's the opposite of a dragon? A lot of these are reboiling the same idea into new forms. To Arnold, the key to creativity is reframing, rethinking, turning a thing over in your mind. It's about smashing new things against it until something sticks. You take old ideas and make them new by doing this. You change tropes by doing this. You create just something new by doing this. Number 8. Keep it fluid for as long as you can. Arnold suggests keeping logic out of something for as long as possible. Sometimes you'll write a story and you don't know what it's about until you finish it. This ties into tip 2, just using your ideas. Instead of using them at the table, maybe just start writing the idea and see where it leads you. Maybe you'll never know the purpose of an idea until you reach the end. And number 9. Creativity is a muscle. There's only so much you can do in a day. If you are frustrated or you absolutely can't come up with anything, step away from the computer and go do something else. You can't force it. Arnold ties up the list by asking you to go touch grass, please. This is a good list of tips. I can't measure the effect it had on me as a creative, especially after the procedure-built creativity of art school. Being given the freedom to just start writing, to just smash ideas together, to just use the ideas even when they aren't ready. It's led to my career now. Not everyone creates the same. Some desire or need the formulas and step outlines, but for those like me who feel stuck with those, Goblin Punch was a breath of fresh air. It allowed me to step back into the skin of a younger me who was not held ransom by their ideas, but who was empowered by them. My hope is that this video and the blog posts and talking about them can do the same for you. I hope that Goblin Punch works for you like it worked for me all those years ago. Well, I suppose mostly I hope you aren't stuck like I used to be, but I know what it's like. We all get stuck sometimes, and maybe now when you get stuck, you'll have the tools to get out. And maybe it'll come from the delicious Goblin Punch. Thank you.